Constant rate of change. So we've got some definitions here. And it says a predictable rate or amount at which the dependent variable changes in relation to the independent variable. So a predictable rate would be when something changes by that same amount every time. So that's what it's constantly changing by. The change can be represented by the Greek letter delta. So when you see this little triangle, that means the change. And when you find the change in something, you're going to subtract. And you'll see that on the next slide, that we'll be subtracting the numbers in order to find the change. Okay, and then we have the constant rate of change is written as a simplified fraction. In an equation, it is represented by the letter m. Okay, so we want to remember a few things. Constant rate of change is the change in your y values. So your y values will go in the top of your fraction, and the change in the x values will go in the denominator of your fraction. Okay, these are just other ways you may see it represented. Delta y, change in the y, over delta x, change in the x. And that all equals your m, which is your constant rate of change. Now let's look at the examples that are done here. Okay, so for the first, the beginning of this, we have the verbal description. And this whole example is just one big example, just representing it in different ways. So we first have the verbal description, $3 per pound. Okay, now we have a table. Well, the weight, you have the weight, different weights here, 1, 2, 3, 4, the cost and the dollars, right? Because doesn't this, the cost is your dependent, because the cost depends on your weight that you buy. Okay, so the x is your independent value, the y is your dependent. Okay, so in the table, you can see here there's these arrows. It's figuring out the change. So the change from 1 to 2, it's worked out over on the side just in case you weren't sure. So from 1 to 2, it added 1. So if I kept going throughout the table, each time it added 1. Now from here, we went from 3 to 6, that's adding 3. 6 to 9, adding 3, and each time you add 3. Now the way you would set up your ratio, remember it's the delta y over the delta x. So the change in your y needs to go in the numerator, over the change in your x will go in the denominator. Then you'll simplify that ratio and it will equal 3. So your rate of change is 3. And you can see over here in the equation, notice it says y equals 3x. Earlier it did say that your constant rate of change is going to be your m in the equation. So now we keep looking. Now we go to the graph version, and we have here the weight in pounds at the bottom. We have the cost in dollars on the side. And then there's some points plotted on here. Well, those points are plotted from the points that are in the table. So remember, you plot x, then y. So you go 1 and then 3. So that's your first point. All right, so you're going to find your constant rate of change from a graph. You really only need 2 pair of points. So we're just looking at these two right here. So you would rise, because if you rise, remember it's the y, the change in the y first, over the change in the x. So when we rise, you got to watch out over on the side here, because the numbers jump. So we went from 3 to 6, so that was a plus 3. We went up 3. And then we're going to run. Now if we look over here, that's going to be plus 1. Put it together in your ratio. The y, the change in the y would go at the top, over the change in the x would go in the denominator, and you would still get 3. So notice all of these situations, you still get a constant rate of change of 3. And so down at the bottom, it's just putting it all together. the constant rate of change. If you notice, there's that magic 3 all through every representation. The change in the y was 3, change in the x was 1, whether you looked at it this way, that way, or you put it in the m, it's still 3 over 1. So it's $3 for 1 pound. That's how you would actually read those numbers. All right, don't think too much on this. Just remember, figure out the change from just 2 pairs of XY values. 1 to 2, it was +1. 3 to 6, it was +3. Put those numbers into your ratio, simplify your fraction, and you're good to go.